We begin this episode by acknowledging the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which we record and share these stories. We pay our deepest respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all First Nations peoples listening or watching today's episode. We honour those who walked before us, their enduring connection to country, and the stories held in land, sky, and spirit. May we listen with openness and learn with humility. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to Beyond the Veil Australia podcast, where history, mystery, and the unexplained collide. From eerie encounters to forgotten histories, from channeled messages to scientific perspectives, we explore phenomena that defy easy explanation. I'm Heather, your guide through the shadows and the host of Beyond the Veil Australia podcast. Together, we'll unravel paranormal events, curious connections, and the questions that refuse to stay quiet. So whether you're a skeptic, a seeker, or somewhere in between, this space is for you. Welcome. Last season, we lifted the veil, but this time we stepped through. So, the passage is open. What waits beyond is now calling your name. Hello and welcome to Beyond the Veil Australia podcast. I'm Heather, your host, and thank you again for joining me. I am really pleased that I'm able to get back in and get some recording done because it has just been utter chaos in life. I also hope that everybody has enjoyed the Beechworth episodes with obviously the collaborations with Monique and Anthony from Date Night with the Ghost Gang and Sam from Aussie Afterlife, and of course the lovely Mel, who is a investigator and a guide at the quarantine station in Sydney. I hope that you've enjoyed those episodes. I do apologise that the investigation episode was very, very long, but there was so much that sort of happened in that you've got to be so, I don't know, selective about what you're putting in there, and there's some stuff that you can't not put it in. So thank you to everybody that's listened to that so far, and I hope that you've also enjoyed the post-investigation episode as well. I know that one's not quite as long. It's still longish, but not quite pushing the 2-hour mark like the investigation episode. So here we are. We're now into the final topic for this season, which is called the shadow sense. And I'm really excited to touch on this subject. And I think when I was looking at putting together my structure for this season, particularly with the Beechworth investigation, I knew that I really wanted to try and keep this topic as close to it as possible, being that it's an asylum, and this is looking at sort of mental health and paranormal phenomena, and I'm really excited to jump into this one. This has been something that for years I've had a lot of thoughts about. I think I may have touched on it in the investigation and the post-investigation episodes, but I work in mental health now, but prior to working in mental health, I was in community services as well, and working with more vulnerable populations. And one thing that was was something that was a common theme that I was able to pick up through pattern recognition, which is probably part of the neurodiversity in me, was that there was a very common theme between a lot of the people that I was working with that had, I guess, what the modern world would call mental illness. But the spiritual part of me would sometimes take on board some of the things that would be said or done or just noted in terms of behaviour that really made me question, what if what is deemed as mental illness in the modern sense, and this is just a very general kind of overview here, just so that you can kind of get a bit of an idea of where my thought processes and patterns were. But what happens if the societal norm of mental illness is, what if particular illnesses, for example, are actually not able to be explained because it's actually a spiritual connection that that person's experiencing, and there's no category to put that in because, you know, it is the paranormal realm is still something that is still scientifically trying to be worked through and had answers for, right? So, you know, what if some of these supposed mental illnesses are actually paranormal experiences, and because of the way society is set up, that it's described as a particular type of mental illness. So this is a thought process that I've had for a long time, and they're things that, I guess for me, I recognize a lot of patterns very quickly. I'm very observant with all of that sort of stuff. And even if it's not necessarily a conversation or anything like that, I'm still sitting there and my brain is like taking in all of that information to kind of go, but what if it's this, or what if it's that? That would make sense if it's this, or that would make sense if it's that. And yeah, I guess in my own spiritual journey as well, it's something that's come up a couple of times, is this thought process around mental health and paranormal or psychic abilities. And so, yeah, I was really, really keen to do this topic, and it was something that I think we have touched a little bit on in, I think it may have been Tools of the Trade in one of the episodes, where it was sort of thinking about if you have listened to those episodes, if you can remember me saying, you know, it's like that taco ad that we had here in Australia of why can't it be both? Or what if it's a little bit of both, but it's something completely different that we're just not able to have an explanation for. And I do recall sort of thinking back in those episodes about what if we've got a scientific theory, for example, that kind of puts something in one direction, and then you've got a spiritual part of you that's on the other side that goes, but what if it's this? And then you've got this big unknown in the middle that's kind of like, well, what if it's both? What if it's neither? What if it's something completely different altogether? So the shadow sense sort of came about through lots of just different experiences over the years, like personal ones, professional ones. So this is where we're sort of coming into kind of exploring this a bit more now. And I find it is probably a very good topic to follow on from Beyond the Ward episodes, being that we were in Beechworth Asylum in Beechworth, Victoria, Australia. And I understand too that asylums way back when weren't just mental illness. There was a lot more that was accommodated in terms of the asylum itself, with different needs for different people and things like that. But I'm kind of keeping it more focused on the mental health aspect, because most of the time, the common theme in an asylum is that there is mental health challenges through all parts of it, regardless of whether it's specifically for mental health treatment or it's something else. I think it's something that is very intersectional with a lot of life, in terms of that historical thought process. So here we are, the shadow sense. So I'm very, very excited to delve into this. But before we do, I obviously just want to give a really big shout out to everybody. Thank you again so much for listening or viewing the podcast, whether that's on the audio platforms or on YouTube. I really, really appreciate everybody's support in doing this. Again, it's not something that I thought would be, I don't know if popular is the right word, but I didn't expect it to be so well received. And I am still blown away, because now I'm looking at it, we're in April at the time of recording this. This is the week after Easter, and it's basically 12 months since I started putting all of the things in place to get this up and moving. So April is the birthday month of Beyond the Veil Australia podcast, and I've got goosebumps now, but it's just really, it's very, I can't even really describe it. I'm just kind of gobsmacked that there's been so much interest in this, and that people really want to engage. And the opportunities that have come from this in 12 months, I can reflect, and it's just truly phenomenal and amazing. And it's just, I can almost feel my spirit team being like, told you so. Because I remember for a good 6 months before I even put the podcast into actual action, I had been thinking about, I really need to get into the area that I'm really passionate about and something that I really enjoy doing around the paranormal and spirituality and the psychic abilities. And because I was also on that psychic journey as well, I was kind of like, well, what do I do? And I remember finding myself in Canva, just conceptualizing ideas about the podcast and what my vibe is and what is it that I want to do. Would it be better to do a podcast? Would it be better to do, I don't know, like an investigation style channel? Like, I really wasn't sure on what to do, but every time I came back to the concept of a podcast, that was where I felt this unwavering support from, I guess, my spirit guides. Kind of, it felt like a physical, warm, gentle push. And that's how I knew that it was like, well, maybe that's the avenue I need to explore. And I guess for me, I was really concerned because I thought, oh my God, there's a podcast for just about everything now. And what's going to make mine any different from the next one? Is it going to be something people are interested in? And I just kept feeling like the spirit team was just kind of going, fuck what anyone thinks. Just do it for you. It doesn't need to be for the rest of the world. If you enjoy doing this, the right people that will enjoy what you do will be there. And it took a lot of individual growth to properly take in that concept, because I was at the time I'd been in a job that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, I really liked the job that I had, but unfortunately, just due to political issues, there was a lot of pressure on those systems, and sadly, there was more pressure and more work, but no funding to get more people in to make the work easier. And I was really burnt out, and I was very mentally drained because I kind of was like, I want to work in this area because I want to help people, because I've been in positions where I've needed help and it's been really hard to get. Or when you have got that help, you're like, well, how can I give back to the services, or how can I give back to the wider community for some of the support I received? And, you know, I look at it and I kind of go, look, the support I received was very, very minimal in the grand scheme of things, but it was still support nonetheless. And for me, it might be maybe a little bit old fashioned. I don't know. Maybe it's just me as a person, but it's kind of like, you pay it forward. You know, it's about, if somebody's there to help you when you can, even if that person doesn't necessarily want something back, pay it forward to them. Or if they don't want anything and they made it explicitly clear they don't want anything, pay it forward to the next person, because you just don't know how that can help someone in their life. So for me, that was what drove me into that particular sector. And I really lost a lot of confidence in myself. I really had just spiraled in a way where I just went, I don't know what I can do. I feel like I want to help people, and the systems aren't geared to help people. They're making it harder for people, and it's now only getting worse, and, you know, all those sorts of things. And I just kind of went, you know, there's a bit of that social justice warrior in me, which from what I've recently learned is actually a bit of a trait of people that are neurodiverse, and they feel that empathy and that injustice, and they feel it with every fiber of their being, which I do. And it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, okay, maybe this is why I love doing what I do, but I'm really pissed off with the systems, you know? Yeah, so there's kind of a bit of an overview, but I was really not in a place where I had any kind of confidence. So I really did not think that doing a podcast necessarily was what was going to help bring me back to who I was and bring me out of my shell and keep pushing me on this journey spiritually and mentally and physically. And I really had no idea what I was in for. I really had no idea what opportunities would come. And I can sit back here and reflect and go, holy shit, like so much has happened in these 12 months from the podcast that I just can't put it into words. It's just so truly amazing. And so I know there have been delays in between different things. And, I do appreciate everybody's support in understanding that life does happen and sometimes things have to be maneuvered in a way that works for you. But, to be here 12 months on is just not something that I'd actually expected. I just didn't think that I would be here in 12 months still doing this. I didn't think it would be something that would be interesting. I didn't think people would want to listen to me, all those sorts of things. I didn't think people would want to come on and talk to me about paranormal stuff, let alone, invite me on investigations or anything like that. Or for people that I have worked with that have been like, hey, when you can, I would really love to get onto your podcast and talk with you again. And to have that, people that have worked with you that are like, I want to come back on again. I want to talk with stuff with you. And you know what I mean? Like, to have that even in itself was just so incredible that it's like, oh my God, now I have to get my shit together and try and reorganize all of that again. And it's obviously been a bit of a change now because, obviously I'm pregnant with my third child, and it has tweaked maybe the way I'm going to be able to do things. But I think the fact that it's still so widely wanted and people are just interested, it just reminds me that it's like, it's okay if you can't do it every single week like you'd wanted to do. It's okay, it's okay that life gets busy and people understand. So, and of course, like last weekend was obviously Easter. By the time this is out, it's probably a few weeks past that. But, last weekend on Easter weekend, we started the very first proper interior project of our house. We're planning on renovating our house. So the first project we did was we painted the back bedroom, which is where I actually had all my podcasts set up. And we've now put both my sons into that room with new bunk beds, and we've really made a good start on that. So I'm now in the other room, which we're also going to be painting probably this weekend. Hence why I'm really trying to push to get these episodes recorded so that they can just flow on out and I'm not disrupting the flow too much. But this room for the next probably sort of 8 weeks-ish or so will be like my podcast and workspace, because I obviously work from home sometimes as well. And then after that, it will be the baby's like nursery, I guess, even though she won't be sleeping in here for a while. Obviously having all of her stuff somewhere will be in this room. So it's been definitely over Easter was a massive weekend. I think I went to Bunnings Warehouse 3 times across 3 days. I think obviously Good Friday, everything is closed, which was sort of a bummer because if I had planned it properly, I would have gone to Bunnings the night before and grabbed stuff. So on Good Friday, I could be doing other prep work, but it didn't work out that way, and that's okay. But on the Saturday, I think, the kids and I, my husband was obviously working, so the kids and I, we'd gone to Bunnings and we were getting all the painting prep and all the tools and all of that sort of stuff. And then, I'd started sanding back some of the timber framing and skirting boards just to get the varnish off. And then we obviously then went, okay, fuck it. Yep, we've already committed. Let's just go back and get the paint and the primer and just get on with it. So sure enough, back to Bunnings again to get the paint, to get the primer, get everything. And then we'd started painting on the Saturday sort of afternoon. And then we'd sort of done all the like the trim and the frames and all of that sort of stuff. And then on the Sunday morning, we started, we'd finished off the framework. It still needed another coat. So we put another coat on and then we made a start on the walls. And so that took us most of the day because you've obviously got to have a couple of hours in between coats for it to dry. And then we had these bunk beds, which look fabulous, by the way, but my husband and I, both being neurodivergent and also being pregnant and a little bit hormonal, the bunk beds supposedly, according to the instructions, were supposed to take 2 hours to put together. Well, it took us 5. Yeah, it took us 5. And the reason it took us 5 is because my husband wanted to work on the floor, on the ground, and put things together. But I'm now getting into the heavily pregnant stage. So being on the floor in any position is just not okay. Like if I'm down there, I'm going to be sore and then I can't fucking get back up, or without having to climb on shit to get back up. And I was getting frustrated because these instructions were picture instructions only. They did not give you any verbal kind of instructions or written instructions on actual, like, connect part A to part B. No, there was none of that. And the other thing was, these things were numbered, which most of the time, if it's numbered and there's no words there that tell you what to do, you can figure it out. The problem was these numbers were not done in a way that I was familiar with or that he was familiar with. So, for example, like the bed ends, like the foot and the head part of the bunks for the bottom and the top had the same, it was like, they're the same parts, and they were all like numbered, like all 11, all 10, all 9, for example. That's what I know how to do things, is you'll go, here's the number and you need X amount of them. Well, there was part of that, but the rest of them were all individually numbered. So you would have, say, one side of the bed was a 12 and the other side was a 13. And then for the next bed, it was a 14 and then a 15. And when you've got no words and very, very badly numbered pieces, when I say badly numbered, some of them you'd be like, oh, that's definitely a 5. You'd look at the next one and go, what even is that? It just looks like a blue mark. There's no actual identifier to tell me whether that's a 7, a 1, a fucking 9 million, anything. So that's why it took us 5 hours. And by the end of it, my back was killing me. My feet were killing me. Every part of my body was like, why have you decided to paint and put bunks together and do all of this all in a day? You're pregnant and your body is now much older than it was when it had your first 2. So why the fuck are you doing it? You're an idiot. And that's what frustrates me, is that in my brain, I've still got energy to do things, but my body tells me different. I may have also at some point over the weekend gone out and hacked some more trees in my garden. I may have also got a shovel and hacked at some roots of old plants that I was like, no, we're going to get rid of those anyway. Just fucking do it now. Really, I mean, you could probably say that I'm nesting, probably. It's partly nesting, partly wanting to get started on the renovations, and partly just fed up with feeling like you've got a jungle out the front of your house that you can't fucking walk through when you go from your car to the front door. I think it's all of those things. Make of that what you will. But yes, Easter weekend was spent with a lot of that. We've also got like a hard rubbish collection coming up in the next couple of weeks. So in the process of waiting for paint to dry and all of that, we've had to move stuff out of rooms, and it just felt horrible, like a hoarder's house. And we were both my husband and I were just getting the ick, because we're like, we can't move it yet because we've got to get this in here and that in there and the paint here and the paint there. And we were getting so frustrated because we just felt because there was just shit everywhere. So we've managed to clean out a lot of stuff. We also used the opportunity to clean out the boys' wardrobes and their drawers as well, because all of a sudden we ended up with all these clothes. Half of them don't fit them, and so we had to go through and sort all of that too. So it literally was just chaos on legs. Thankfully, we had some chocolate to eat in between doing everything. But it's just been, honestly, Easter weekend was one where I kind of went, if I get a chance, maybe I'll jump on and do some more recording. No, that wasn't going to happen. And obviously it's school holidays here for us. So my kids have like holiday programs at their school and their kinder. And I made a point of going, they're both going on the Friday because I'm not working and I need to get my episodes recorded. So
Here we are. So all of my Shadow Sense episodes are going to be recorded pretty much back to back, and will come out over several weeks. But yeah, there's like half of my life story in the last couple of weeks as well, which has also slowed me down, which has also meant that the energy for social media, based on what was going on over Easter, the energy for social media was a little bit lacking. So yeah, I do apologize. I'm trying to keep myself ahead of the game, but because there's other projects sort of happening that, it's sort of like the quicker we can get that done, then we don't have to do it again, and it's out of the way, and it's just going to be easier for when the baby's born and life is hunky-dory. So yeah, there's my big ramble that's probably gone on for, good 20 minutes or so. So I apologize, but just thought I'd fill you all in on where we're at, which, I was doing really well with my episodes and not rambling as much. But I think because there's just been so much happening, I like to share it with you so that you know that it's like I'm not ignoring people. I'm a little bit preoccupied with something else, and the podcast had to take a back seat. And that's okay. It happens. I think if I wasn't pregnant, it would be very different. But anyway, here we are. Let's get started. So thank you all again for joining me. Thank you for your support over the last year of this podcast. And yeah, I hope that you enjoy this trilogy of the Shadow Sense as well. And of course, I'd be really keen to hear what other people's thoughts are on this as well, because I think it's like a big giant black hole that probably doesn't have a wrong or a right answer, but I think it's like a discovery thing. It's sort of the further you go down the rabbit hole, maybe the more information you get, and the more you can sort of develop some thoughts and theories on it, I guess. So here we go. There are 5 senses everyone agrees on: sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. 5 neat categories that make the world feel predictable, manageable, safe. But beneath those familiar senses lies another layer, a quiet, ancient sense that doesn't fit neatly into biology or psychology. A sense that flickers at the edge of awareness. A sense that warns, whispers, or watches. It's the moment your body reacts before your mind understands why. The moment the air shifts. The moment something unseen steps into your awareness. Some call it intuition. Some call it hypervigilance. And some call it psychic sensitivity, while others call it delusion. But whatever name you give it, there is one thing that is agreed on. The experience is universal. Science quietly supports this. Modern neuroscience recognises more than 5 senses, closer to 22 to 33, depending on the researcher. Interoception, oh God, I hope I'm going to say this right. Proprioception, I'm not even going to try. Magnetoception candidates, subtle environmental detection systems that we barely understand. I'm really sorry, I completely butchered that. Basically, the mind says these are ancient survival mechanisms, and the mystery says these are the senses we've forgotten how to name. So, in this part 1 episode of the Shadow Sense, the fine line between mind and mystery, let's explore the very beginnings of whether it's mental health, paranormal, or something else entirely. The moment that you feel it. Everyone has felt it at least once. That sudden electric awareness that someone is behind you, even when you haven't heard a sound. The prickling at the back of your neck in an empty room. The instinct to turn your head at the exact moment that you feel someone is staring at you. These moments arrive without warning. They don't ask permission. They simply happen. A ripple through the nervous system. A tightening in the chest. and a shift in the air that your body registers before your mind can actually make sense of it. Psychologists call this pre-attentive threat detection. In other words, it's the brain's ancient systems that scan for danger long before conscious thought. Paranormal researchers call it the shadow sense, a subtle awareness of presence, whether it's physical or otherwise. Sometimes it's subtle, a pause in a conversation, a silence that feels heavier than it should, a doorway that you may hesitate to walk through without knowing why. Sometimes it's a childhood memory, so it could be standing in a hallway at night, the house is quiet, the air's still, and yet something in you knows that you're not alone. The mind says children have more open sensory gating, meaning they notice more. The mystery says children haven't yet learned to ignore the unseen. Sometimes it's in nature. The bush is going silent. The world is holding its breath. Sometimes it's in a hospital corridor at night. Sometimes it's in your own home, a room that you avoid, a staircase you climb faster than you mean to. These moments don't come with explanations. They come with sensations. Both sides, the psychology and the paranormal, agree on one thing: the feeling. It is real, and it's older than language. The body knows before the mind. The human body is a finely tuned instrument, one that notices far more than we can consciously register. We would like to think that we're rational creatures, guided by logic and conscious thought. But the truth is, most of what we perceive never reaches awareness. The amygdala is the brain's ancient alarm system, and it reacts within 30 milliseconds. It fires before you think, before you interpret, and before you understand. Again, the mind says that this is survival, and the mystery says this is the first whisper of a presence. Peripheral vision. Humans detect motion in peripheral vision up to 10 times faster than in central vision, a leftover predator detection system from before evolvement. This is why shadows flicker at the edge of sight. The skin. The skin senses air pressure, humidity, static change, electromagnetic shifts, emotional tension, and goosebumps without cold, warmth without heat, and a tightening in the stomach without cause. Infrasound. Low frequency sound, so below 20 Hz, can cause unease, chills, pressure, shadow-like movement. The famous Vic Tandy experiment showed that a 19 Hz frequency can make people feel watched and even see grey shapes in their peripheral vision. The mind then says infrared sounds distort perception. But the mystery says infrasound thins the veil. The heart. The heart reacts before the brain. Studies show that it anticipates emotional or environmental shifts seconds before the conscious awareness. And our mind would say this is neurocardiac intuition, and the mystery says the heart senses presence. Sometimes the body knows long before the mind understands. But even with all of these mechanisms, some moments feel like more than biology. So, what are we thinking so far? Some of these things that have kind of come up, which is obviously talking about, and this is one thing that I really wanted to do when I was putting this together, was to sort of keep it as this is kind of the general thing. This is what science and the mind might say, and this is what mystery and the paranormal might say. They're not obviously mutually exclusive. Sometimes there are going to be things that sort of overlap a little bit. So I'm curious to hear what people think about that. But what I find really interesting is particularly with the physical sensations that you get. And I know, regardless of whether you're in a haunted location or not, I think we've all had that feeling where, I don't know, you could be anywhere. You could be in your home, you could be out at the shops, you could be going for a walk, anything. And you've just got this feeling like your body is detecting energy and something around you before you've actually taken in what it is. You know, you could be walking somewhere and you might go, oh, I don't really want to go down that path because there's just something that's telling me not to go down that way. So I'm going to go this way. Or it could be that, you know, you might be walking and you think, oh, I think it feels like someone's right behind me, and you can turn around and there's fucking no one there. You know, it's that, I guess, like early human sensation of predator and prey. Like your body is able to still pick up those things, like that, as it was saying, like it's ancient threat detection. It can still pick up those things long before you're able to pick it up. And I guess the other thing is, you know, as we talked about before, you know, we think that we're quite logical and we are rational and things like that. And I think that's just something that we've been taught as we've evolved, as society evolved, is that here's logic, here's rationale, and this is what it is. And if you can't explain it, then either you're mentally unwell, or depending on who you're talking to, oh my God, wow, that sounds like a really creepy paranormal experience. You know what I mean? So yeah, I find it really interesting, like that we're sort of looking at this from a really early kind of evolvement perspective to start with, is that we're identifying you know, the human body's what's the word I'm looking for? Like natural functioning potentially. Sometimes you can be walking down, you go, oh fuck, I feel like someone's watching me or whatever, and you might glance around and you might fucking see someone looking at you. You know what I mean? Like your body is able to pick up those things, whether it's something you can see with your own eye or not. So I find it really interesting that we're kind of touching on that to begin with, because there is a thought process, you know, and I mean, this may be something that I may end up kind of doing a bit more of a deeper dive into in the next episode. But for example, things like I'm going to use schizophrenia for an example, because I feel like it's a fairly good example to use. But, you know, for people with schizophrenia, the most common type of hallucination, if you want to call it that somebody with schizophrenia will experience, is auditory, which is hearing voices. So whether that's hearing them internally or hearing them audibly in the outer ear. And so, you know, I think about that from my perspective as somebody who, you know, is exploring the psychic abilities that I have. I have spoken to a friend about this before, who is also a psych nurse. You also know her as Sam from Aussie Afterlife. But we have joked a couple of times where it's just like we'll feel something or we'll hear something or whatever, and it feels like it's a message coming through. But us working in the space that we do, because we're looking at it from a different perspective, we'll start going, fuck, have we got schizophrenia, you know? And we sort of giggle about it, because it's kind of just like, well, technically, these experiences, whether they're internal voices that you're hearing or external auditory voices or sounds or something you're happening, it's like, well, they're basically the same, but it's trying to, I guess, you know, we peel it back a bit further. Yes, there's obviously going to be more context to it, but on a very surface level, for me, that was what really got me thinking about mental health and paranormal or psychic phenomena. Was I had worked with people that did have schizophrenia. And, you know, when you stand in your logical professional brain, you'll be like, okay, yeah, they're not well. They're really not doing okay. But then when you might walk away from that, some of the things that they might have said, because you're somebody that's so interested in the paranormal and you can see a little bit more than just society's logic and expectation, you start to then have this little question pop up in your mind of, Well, what if they're actually having a spiritual or a psychic experience or an actual paranormal experience, and potentially because of their circumstances, they may be somebody that is in a lower socioeconomic background, or they may not have access to adequate supports or anything like that. But sometimes when you're in someone's home, you will see different types of paraphernalia around as well. So, that was sort of where it's sort of like coming into, well, have they been taking illicit substances? Very likely, because sometimes you can smell it before you see anything. But, it's that sort of thinking where I was kind of like, well, yeah, they don't sound well and they don't blah, 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 blah. But you do catch yourself thinking about it going, okay, well, is this then coming into the mental health thing as a, like thinking it from a mental health lens? Is it like a, that they're not taking the medication for, say, their schizophrenia, and they're using illicit substances, which is therefore putting them into more of like a drug-induced psychosis, so to speak, like just to keep it really simple. Or is that the trigger? It's really a big thought process. But I have worked with somebody who had mentioned things about UAP phenomena. And this is in my outside professional non-paranormal role, right? In my mental health role. And I'm sure even Sam has probably talked about this in some of her episodes as well, is some of the things that you may experience when working with patients and consumers, is some of the things that they might say that you're kind of like, okay. And then when you think about it in your paranormal perspective, you're like, they could be onto something. So I was working with someone who had mentioned some things around UAPs, and he'd obviously started talking about Skinwalker Ranch. And I said, oh, yes. Yeah. And, I was on the phone with him. So, it was a bit easier because I could kind of redirect the conversation where I needed to. But he was sort of talking about Skinwalker Ranch and different UAP phenomena. What made it different, I suppose, for me was, in a paranormal sense, you're kind of generally keeping it on the one straight and narrow topic, whereas sometimes when somebody's maybe not well, that's the basis of their conversation, but then there will be another random thing that's got nothing to do with anything that comes in, and we start circling around that, and then somehow we get back to the original topic of conversation, and then you move your way through, and then there's another random thing, and then somehow they end up all connected at the end. Don't ask me how they end up connected at the end, but when you sit there and you actually then reflect on what they've said, you're like, oh, okay, there's probably a little bit more substance to this than I thought. And you take it with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, you're not there to discuss the paranormal. You're there for other reasons. But it does get me thinking a little bit, is it sort of like, okay, well, I can, in this particular circumstance, I could see where, for someone who is a sensitive psychic ability person with interest in the paranormal, if I was talking about some of the stuff I was talking about in a different setting, I could see where they would say, you've got this, or this, or we need to give you this, or we need to give you, I can see that. So it was really interesting just kind of listening to this person talk about different things. And it's, obviously my role is obviously not for any sort of, judgment's not the right word, but it's not my decision to say whether they've got mental illness or not. I'm not there for that purpose. I'm there just to help communicate to their treating team. So some of the things that this person had sort of said about their psychiatrist, that what their psychiatrist thoughts were about him, I could kind of see in the mental health lens, I could see where that psychiatrist is coming from. Not that you're there to agree or disagree with anyone. I could sort of see where he's forming his diagnosis and his treatment and all that sort of stuff. But then I can also see the other part of me that's very connected to paranormal stuff. I could see exactly where this consumer was coming from with what he was saying, because I was kind of like, well, you're explaining it in a way that I would explain it. And if I was in this setting, would this actually be what would happen to me? So it's very interesting to just kind of look at those two different things, and being able to see both sides of that lens. It's really interesting. So that's why I'm kind of like thinking about this. And I mean, obviously, I'm not going to go like completely in depth with that particular story, but that's just kind of like a bit of an overview of just some of the experiences that have continually fueled this thought pattern in my brain about, is it spiritual and psychic or paranormal, or is it actually a mental health condition? And where has, like, and I mean, I haven't done enough research into the actual like psychology, the actual development of psychiatry and mental health. I haven't gone down that rabbit hole because I'll probably get stuck there and yeah. But part of my thought process was sort of like, okay, well, if we look at like ancient cultures around the world, or even, even more modern cultures or religious based belief systems, is that it is based on a more spiritual purpose, right? And so I look at that and kind of go, okay, well, that's been around for much longer than psychiatry has. So how has psychiatry come about? And are what they're doing with developing is not the right word. I'm just going to use the word creating because I can't think of a word, but creating a mental illness theory about what something is. I hope that makes sense to people. I'm sorry, I just knocked my mic as well if you're listening on the audio platforms, my bad. But what led them to schizophrenia, for example? How the hell did they decide that that was a mental illness and isn't a spiritual thing, right? Or a spiritual practice, spiritual belief, or, then you look at, again, ancient cultures, probably more particularly, but like medicine people and shamans and, I guess witches, because they were part of different cultures, but those sorts of healers and things like that. Like how have we got something that we're calling a mental illness in, say, psychiatry, that's been around for a lot less than spiritualism and religion and all of that, right? Like, I think that's where sometimes I get really stumped, because I'm thinking about it going, well, how did this even come about? How did you even decide that that was actually a mental illness? Like, what led you to go, this is actually a mental illness? But what I've found really fascinating, particularly in terms of the neurodivergence side of things, and again, this probably feeds in a little bit into the mental health sort of thing. My husband has ADHD, and he was only recently diagnosed in the last 3 or 4 years. For me, my sister's got ADHD. She was diagnosed with ADHD at around 5 or 6, more or less. And I remember when I first met my husband, I could pick up that he had ADHD long before he even realized. And I think he sort of went, oh, maybe I've got ADHD or something, or ADD or whatever. And I'm kind of like, well, I reckon you do, because of blah, 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 blah. Because I'd grown up seeing my sister, and I'm not saying that everyone with ADHD is the same, but there are a lot of similarities between the two of them in the way that like the talking really fast, and just you can tell that their brain is firing on every single cylinder trying to get something out, and you're just like, okay, I've got to buckle in for a minute, just let it go, it'll run out of steam, and then we can kind of come back to the conversation and start again, right? And not in a bad way, it's more just, I could pick that up. And so obviously he then was able to get a diagnosis. And I think for him, that's been, he's felt that that's been really helpful, because he's like, well, now I can understand more about my life now, which is, it's great on one hand and pretty shitty on the other, because it's great on one hand where you can start to go, I understand me better now, because now I know why I do X, Y, Z, and why blah, 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 blah. But it's also really shitty on the other hand, because you've then spent majority of your life not knowing that that's actually what was going on for you, and continuously being punished by the systems because you didn't fit societal's mold, right? So that's just a real basic overview. If you've listened to the Beyond the Ward episodes, particularly the investigation and the post-investigation episodes, I had obviously shared that my eldest son, who's 7, we recently had a dual diagnosis come back for him of autism and ADHD. And throughout the process of getting him assessed, what I actually found myself doing was I managed to find like a website that I think they were based in New South Wales from memory, that specializes in neurodiverse diagnoses in adults. And when I was kind of scrolling through, because I thought I really feel like I might benefit from screening for both autism and ADHD. And what they had sort of a bit further down their page was, if you feel that you'd like to go for an assessment, here's some pre-screening tools, which are basically based on the DSM-5 or more or less part of it, which is the diagnostic tool for neurodiversity, and see how you, what you, I guess, I hate using the word score, but basically see where you rate on this and what the indicators might have. It will either indicate that you don't need to have an assessment if you don't feel, or it would indicate that if you're interested, you could go forth with a formal assessment and what have you. So I decided to do both the autism and the ADHD. So the first time I did this, I did these screenings twice, about a month to 6 weeks apart. The same one. The first time I did the autism one, I scored well over half of their scaling thing. And the ADHD one, I scored basically borderline. And I'm like, okay, if I've got both, I could kind of see that maybe one day I'm more sort of leaning this way and the other day I'm leaning this way. So I made a point of, for my own kind of thought process and maybe a little bit of validation as well, was in about 4 to 6 weeks, I would retake those same pre-screening tools. And so I did. And so I did my second pre-screening for the autism, and I scored slightly lower than I did before, but still over the halfway mark. And then with the ADHD ones, I scored higher than I did the first time. So for me, I kind of went, right, that's validation enough for me to say, I am definitely neurodiverse. There's no doubt about it. The scores haven't dramatically changed. They have altered slightly, but they're still above that halfway mark where the response was, the results of this are basically indicating that you could go for a official diagnosis, or whatever the lingo was. And for me, I think it really, again, even though that was only pre-screening stuff, because I know that they're part of the DSM-5 and part of the screening tools that they use, for me it was very validating, because I then started to think back and go, oh my God, because I'd been obviously, and this is why I love TikTok, I find so much stuff out on TikTok. I love it. It's like my own encyclopedia sometimes. But there were a lot of things that were coming up around ADHD and autism across TikTok, and particularly in women and, adult women, not just in children. And there were so many things that just started triggering my thought process of like, oh my God, that is actually autism. That is actually ADHD. That, holy fucking shit. And my brain almost exploded, because it was like, is that what that is? Or I didn't even know that was actually stimming. I thought that was just I don't know. I thought that was a normal thing. I didn't even know that was stimming, and I do that. And what the fuck, So it really opened my eyes. So I think for me, then when we continued through this process with my son, I could see so much of me in him that it was like, if not to say that we're the same person, but there was so many like uncanny similarities in our traits, in everything, down to the way we would do things or think about things or talk about things, that it was just like extra confirmation that I mean, I'd like to go and get an official diagnosis. The only problem is it costs like several $1,000s to do. Depending on where you go, sometimes there are places that do it a little bit less, but it is still expensive, and especially with a young family and things like that, it's just not doable. But for me, it was enough validation to go, I understand me better now. And what was interesting was, I thought about that and went, so my sister, who was diagnosed with ADHD at 5 or 6, compared to her, I looked like what is described as the neurotypical or the societal mold of normal. Because I had the autism, it would clearly present differently to the ADHD. So it's like, well, there's my sister who's bouncing off the walls, hyperactive and can't sit still. And there's me who could be stimming, but it's not noticed because I'm quietly coloring in, or I'm whatever. You know what I mean? So in the grand scheme of things, those two things look like neurodivergent, neurotypical. And so to kind of keep going on where I was thinking about this with the mold of what is defined as normal and things like that, is a thought process I'd had, which sort of supports a little bit about what we were talking about before, where it's like, well, where the hell psychiatry come from to make this diagnosis, right? What if it's a spiritual thing? The other part of me is kind of going, well, even if it's not a spiritual thing, what if for thousands of years with multiple civilizations over the years of human beings, what if we were all neurodivergent because that was what our brains were wired to do in order to survive for the times we were in terms of human, saber-toothed tiger, and then you move forward into the next lot of civilization, right? What if we've evolved and the neurodivergence is something that's actually normal for a human, but as we've evolved and society evolves, it's technically not seen as normal because we've got we're trying to fit things into boxes and categories that are more than what they need to be for neurodiversity to naturally function with the way it should with the human body. And now we're seeing that there's more research on it and there's more coming out about it. That's where I started to think, well, what if for a while, if you think about it like a funnel, or maybe even like a wormhole, but like a funnel, at the top it's really wide, and that's where neurodiversity is, and that's normal. And then as society continues to evolve, that funnel starts to narrow in terms of what's deemed as normal. And now we're starting to funnel back out down the bottom again, where we're starting to understand, well, what if neurodiversity is actually the natural, normal way a brain functions for a human body based on the evolution of human beings? And that this neurotypical thought process, i.e., the social standards of psychiatry, have tried to put things in a box and label things and say they're something that they're not. And we're using different methods to treat it, in inverted commas, that don't work. And therefore people end up worse because they're being treated with something that they don't need for something that they don't have, because that's what a book that was written by white males has said is that's a disease, rather than it going, that's a leftover from wherever, or that's a leftover from spiritualism, or that, you know what I mean? So I know I've gone on a really, really, really massive tangent here, but that's just to try and give you a bit of context in where my brain has been going. So I just find it interesting that we've sort of talked about, that earlier stuff with human beings, like the ancient alarm system or alert system of, that feeling of someone watching you. Like most people probably still have that. You probably like, fuck, I feel like someone's watching me, or whatever. You don't have to be a paranormal investigator to feel that. You can be anybody on the street, right? So yeah, I just find that really, really fascinating. And I think that's probably why I've kind of gone down this bit of this rabbit hole and probably overshared stuff with you, and that's my bad. But it just kind of helps maybe give you a bit of insight to where my brain and my thought process are. So yeah, I'm curious to hear what people may or may not think about that kind of thought process, and if it's something that you've ever thought about, or if it's something you've thought about and you're looking at it a completely different way, or you've thought about it and gone, holy shit, Heather's actually explaining what my thought process has been. Either way, I'm really keen to hear what people's thoughts are on that, because it's a rabbit hole. It's a funnel and a rabbit hole. So yeah. But so that we don't keep going for another 5 hours, I'm going to keep going, but that's where we're at for the moment. So we'll just kind of park that there and we'll keep going. We're going to move into a little bit more about the sensations, I suppose, and maybe the way the brain connects to those sensations. There are moments when the shadow sense feels unmistakably real, moments that linger long after they've passed. A presence behind you in an empty hallway, movement at the edge of vision, and pressure in the room that wasn't there a moment ago. People will describe sudden cold, a shift in atmosphere, the sense of being observed, movement that doesn't belong to the living, and a feeling of being stepped into. Some of the environmental anomalies. These experiences often occur in places with EMF spikes, magnetic fluctuations, infrasound pockets, sudden temperature gradients. The mind says environmental anomalies influence perception, but the mystery says environmental anomalies accompany the activity. So sometimes the atmosphere might thicken like an invisible fog, and sometimes the space feels wrapped or warped and expanded or contracted. Neuroscientists call this dysmetroposia. I think that's how you say it. It's probably still wrong. Anyway, a temporary distortion in spatial perception. But many reported moments occur in places with no measurable triggers. And that's where the world seems to tilt. The grey zone of perception. Some experiences can be explained by sleep paralysis, disassociation, anxiety, sensory overload, trauma responses. These are real and they matter because they shape perception. But there are other moments that resist categorization. Two people feeling the same presence at the same moment. Pets reacting to something invisible. Objects shifting without a physical cause. Electronics glitching only during encounters. And cold spots that appear to vanish. Dual lens echo. The mind says there are shared cues, environmental triggers, subconscious synchrony. The mystery says intelligent presence, environmental imprinting, and non-physical interaction. Earthquake premonition. Humans and animals can detect P waves seconds before an earthquake, and this is a real, measurable shadow sense. Death and atmosphere. Hospice workers report a shift in the room moments before or after a death. Science notes changes in the electromagnetic fields, air ionisation, and temperature. But none explain the emotional clarity that people feel. Magnetoception, that's a tongue twister. Caltech research suggests humans may have the doormat ability to sense Earth's magnetic fields. The mind says primitive navigation system, but the mystery says energetic sensitivity. The shadow sense lives in this grey zone, the space between what we know and what we feel. And what the shadow sense reveals, whether it's psychological or paranormal, the shadow sense reveals something profound about human consciousness. It shows that we are more perceptive than we realise. We detect danger before we understand it. We sense presence without sight. We read emotion without words. We are connected to our environment in ways that science is still mapping, but it also reveals something deeper. Humans are storytellers, meaning makers, pattern seekers, spiritual beings, biological organisms, and of course something else in between. The shadow sense sits at the intersection of all of these identities. When the mind says perception is complex, the mystery says, so is the unseen. It's the part of us that listens to the quiet, the part that notices the shift in the air, and the part that whispers, pay attention. Whether that something is psychological or paranormal is a question we can't answer. So, as we were kind of saying before, I was hoping that I might have actually been able to pull out a little bit more of that, but I also kind of looked at it and went, well, we kind of really explored a lot of what I just shared kind of in my big ramble in between. But it does kind of then say, doesn't it? Like it's that a human being is complex, right? Like we are complex, and it's probably more about just understanding where we've come from and where we are, and then what those things are in between. But I think we're so pushed to see a scientific only lens rather than looking at it very holistically in terms of the spiritualism, the natural parts of a human body that can't just be explained away by science. So as I was kind of talking about before, was what if neurodivergence is actually what is the normal natural brain function of a human being that has been pushed into a neurotypical landscape because that's the way society has evolved. So I do think about that a lot. And so I could be just completely overthinking the whole thing, but it is a thought process that I've had. So I don't know. I don't know what you guys might think about this, but I'm really keen to hear what your thoughts are. And, this is just the very beginning episode of 3 episodes. So I'm glad that we were able to start with more to do with the actual biology of human beings and how it interacts with the psychology and the spiritual sort of side of that too, because I think it's important to kind of have a bit of a thought process around that first. The shadow sense lives in that liminal space, the place where instinct, intuition, and the unexplained all blur together. But feeling something is only the beginning, because once you sense it, you start asking questions. What was the biological response? Was it a psychological pattern, a spiritual perception, or was it something else entirely? In this next episode, we step deeper into the divide and even the overlap between spiritual sight and psychological interpretation. We explore why some people see shadows, symbols, and signs, while others see stress responses, trauma echoes, or cognitive bias. We look at cultures that treat the unseen as sacred and clinical frameworks that treat the same experiences as symptoms. We ask why some individuals develop heightened sensitivity and whether that sensitivity is a gift, a burden, or a misunderstood form of perception. So once again, the mind says these experiences can be mapped, measured, and explained. But the mystery says they are messages, visions, and intuitive truths. And somewhere in between those two voices is the human experience. So this has been part 1 of the shadow sense, the fine line between mind and mystery. I'm really hoping that you've enjoyed today's episode, and I really hope that you can join me next time as I explore part 2 of the shadow sense, spiritual sight or psychological phenomenon, where belief, biology, and the unseen collide. Once again, thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. And yeah, if you've got any thoughts, please share them in the comments. And of course, please like, follow, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. But if you're listening on an audio platform, if you could leave a comment or share the podcast with somebody that you might think will find this fascinating, that just helps our little paranormal podcast grow and be shared with other people that are like-minded to us as well. So remember, stay grounded, stay curious, and always expect the unexpected. Bye for now.